So here we just want to take an opportunity. Oh, and there goes the recording. So in case anybody didn't hear it, just make sure to click the button that you accept that. So I just want to give a land acknowledgement here. Some people might be familiar with this from other spaces you've been in before. As we talk about our watershed, I want to take a moment for land acknowledgement. So land and water are essential to our lives, and in climate change work, we must consider the complete history of our Earth. As we strive to protect the future of this land and the people on it, we must acknowledge the original inhabitants and stewards of this land, as well as the legacies of colonialism that pushed Indigenous and Native peoples off of their territory and continue to damage our society. We acknowledge that the Charles River Watershed specifically resides on occupied territory of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag tribes. We know that a land acknowledgement is definitely not enough, and we continue to learn, grow, and listen to Native voices as we advocate for a resilient future. If you're unsure of the occupied territory where you reside, because we acknowledge that many people here tonight might be coming from all over, you can learn more about this and how to support and listen to Indigenous Native peoples at the websites that will be posted in the chat momentarily if it hasn't been already. Okay, so I named before CREW. So I'm a program manager with CREW. Again, my name is Leigh. So just quickly, who is CREW? It's named here, right? We're a network of local leaders. We're working at a grassroots level where I like to think of ourselves as a conduit to communities, wherever we can help to prepare people for climate crises. So whether that's hands-on education, if it's workshops, if it's direct resource distribution, we really want to work to empower people to respond as much as possible and do that through the trusting relationships of local leaders. So just a reminder again that this event is part of a larger overarching initiative called Climate Prep Week. So what is Climate Prep Week? It actually is a week-long, last week of September initiative that is part of what is called National Preparedness Month. So people here might not know that September is considered National Preparedness Month. This is an opportunity for communities and cities to come up with creative and meaningful ways to raise awareness about climate change and help people prepare. And so these are just some really great examples and creative examples of ways that communities could come up with events in case you are thinking at some point in time you might want to host an event yourself. So we have workshops like to create emergency prep kits. You have community projects like depaving. We have experiential learning opportunities, and talks and presentations are some impactful ways to raise awareness of climate preparedness. And then you're here tonight participating in one of them. So we often at CREW will also, in addition to supporting other groups who host events, host a couple of our own events in partnership with lots of other institutions and organizations and community. So tonight you're here with us at The River is Rising and So Are We. And we encourage you as well, now you have the Zoom link, to join this Thursday as well for Heat, Health, and Racial Justice, which will be basically an intersectional panel. So just want to say welcome. And from here, I'm actually going to turn it over to Dira, who is going to take us into our next portion of the evening, and that's looking at how we're responding to flooding on a regional scale.
Thanks, Leigh. So hello, everyone. Again, my name's Dira Johanif. I'm with Charles River Watershed Association. And like Leigh was saying, we are currently in a moment where we are preparing ourselves, or we need to be preparing ourselves, our families, and our communities for climate change impacts, because climate change isn't just coming, it's already here, right? This past summer, we've experienced like one of the wettest summer that I've, at least for me, since I've moved to Boston, have experienced. And so this is a moment where we're coming together at very different levels, or at all levels, thinking about ways to address some of these climate change impacts. And on this slide I have here are just some of the images of flooding that our residents, have documented across the Charles River watershed from extreme storms in past years. And in terms of flooding technically is a natural phenomenon, right? Like rivers have floodplains, and because of that, in our modern society, floodwaters a lot of the time are intersecting with our built environment. And with the storms that we're seeing now, there is a lot of destruction happening on property and infrastructure, and a lot of that destruction is also putting people at risk or causing harms to our health or even resulting in fatalities. And so this is a moment where we're coming together and we're really thinking about ways to mitigate some of these risks. And next slide, Leigh. And there are numerous climate change impacts, right? I'm sure many of you who are here know of the various different types, including extreme storms, extreme heat, drought. And for us as an organization, one of our biggest focus is looking at extreme storms. And this fun kind of graphic that I have on the slide here might look a little bit complex, but the big takeaway from this slide is that the storms in the future, in 2050, 2070, are going to be heavier than what we're experiencing now. And a lot of them are might also be a lot more frequent. And what that means in terms of heavier storms is that we're going to get more inches of rain than the storms that we're getting today. And if you take a look at this this graphic right now, we have kind of built for storms that sit on this nice little present baseline storm event. And a lot of what's being built right now is still kind of being built for this kind of timeline or this kind of storm event. But buildings that are being built today are going to be around when this storm happens, when this storm happens, and when like the 2070 storms happen. And so when we're thinking about infrastructure at different levels and for community members, we need to be thinking about all these different kind of storms that are going to happen. We need to be able to adapt to the stronger storms that are happening, and we need to be able to make our communities resilient and have the resources that they need to actually handle and manage these storms. So next slide. And in the Charles River watershed, we like to take what we call a watershed scale view to look at climate change and its impact. And if you're not too familiar, or if you're wondering what exactly is a watershed, I like to think of it kind of like a bathtub, but generally it's, you know, any area of land and it's kind of sloped like a bowl, where when rain or snow falls on this area of land, that water will drain into one common body of water. So in our case, that's the Charles River. So all of the rain and snow falling on our watershed will ultimately end up in the Charles River. And the river itself is actually 80 miles long, and it starts all the way in Hopkinton, and it kind of makes its way down all the way towards the Boston Harbor. There's a total of 35 towns and cities that are part of the watershed, and we have approximately 1 million residents who live and play and learn in the watershed. And as an organization, we work with different levels of municipal, at the state level, and also at the federal level, thinking about ways to address the risks in our watershed. And it's also important to note that a little over 60% of our population actually live in environmental justice communities in our watershed. And that, you know, that's a big focus of when we think about our mission, which is to enhance, restore, and protect the Charles River and its watershed using science, advocacy, and the law. And because tonight's event has a focus on justice, I want to highlight, the next slide, I want to highlight environmental justice communities in our watershed. So we know that environmental justice communities are the first and worst hit by climate change impacts, right? Because of historical redlining policies and decision-making processes that discounted certain communities from receiving the same level of investment as others. And in the watershed scale, when we're looking at our watershed, most of our environmental justice communities are actually found downstream in our watershed. So if you look kind of at the top right-hand corner of the map, the green is where we have our environmental justice communities, and that is downstream or in the lower basin of our watershed, meaning water is flowing towards this way. And so when we think about a concept of climate change solution, especially in terms of flooding, we are thinking of how to invest in mitigation solutions in the upstream portion of our watershed or the middle parts of our watershed, so that those places can actually absorb or hold water before it reaches our downstream communities. And so as we think about that, next slide, Leigh, the first thing that we actually have to know as an organization is where is flooding happening in our watershed. And so one of the projects that we've worked on with our municipalities is what we call the Charles River Flood Model. There's actually a link in the chat that takes you to our website. And this is actually a really kind of innovative way of looking at flooding in the state. Many more watershed organizations are doing it at this scale, but basically it's looking at flooding and taking into account most, if not all, of the watershed communities. So not only by town or city boundaries, but looking at how the relationship between different communities and the land uses that result in different flooding impacts. And so our flood model actually covers the upper and middle part of the watershed all the way up to Watertown and Newton. And you can actually explore the flood model using the link and look at different flood or storm event scenarios into the future and seeing how much more flooding is going to happen with the future projections of climate change. Next slide. And I just want to highlight some of the big kind of results from the flood model. So one of the things that we looked at was 2070 100-year storm. And in that storm, we see that in the watershed, there would be a 61% increase in stormwater runoff. So stormwater running off over impervious surfaces like sidewalks, rooftops, parking lots, and an addition of 11 inches of rain that we are not currently getting today. In that storm event as well, we see an addition of 2,600 acres that don't currently flood that will, in the future, will see severe flooding. And then one of the most important things that we're able to see with the flood model is seeing that in that time frame, there will be over 50 critical facilities. So that's your schools, your hospitals, your police stations, your fire stations that are going to be impacted by flooding as well. And so the first kind of portion of the flood model is looking at where flooding is going to happen, right? The next part of our model is looking at how can we prepare for that flooding? How can we mitigate or reduce the amount of flooding that we're going to get in the watershed? And as an organization, we are big components of building or introducing or incorporating nature-based solutions or strategies. And on this slide, I've just highlighted a couple, which includes building green infrastructure, increasing tree canopy, protecting or restoring our wetlands, and conserving open space, which are all different methods that would allow for more spaces for stormwater to get absorbed or held instead of flooding our community members. And part of this is, like I said before, thinking about these solutions and thinking about where they could be, where we could have these projects implemented and would benefit not only those communities, but also downstream communities where most of our environmental justice neighborhoods or communities are. And next slide, Leigh. And while we have a really great project team consisting of Charles River Watershed Association, our technical consultant, our municipalities, and crew, we acknowledge that a really big important part of actually knowing the right kind of solutions, equitable solutions for our watershed is tapping into the local knowledge. Residents that are living, the real life scenarios of flooding that's happening in our watershed, knowing how they're experiencing that, and also knowing what kind of community solutions they want to see is a really big part of what Leigh and I do in this project. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the images that of us out in the communities, engaging with different community members, and some of the numbers that are highlighted from last year's work, including having over 150 survey responses that have added to how our project team looks at solutions and thinking about implementing them, and being able to connect with over 300 community members has been a really big part of the work that we do. And so I just want to highlight, the links are in the chat, but this is a really great example of what we could do at a regional scale that still requires a lot of local community input, because this is going to affect multiple different community members. And with that, I'll pass it back to Leigh.
Thank you, Dira. And I think before I jump into some of the more local direct responses to flooding that people can get involved in or think about creating in their communities, I just want to reiterate again, Dira, what you just mentioned about being involved on a regional scale. I just understand that it can be a real challenge sometimes, or it can feel a bit like those are some projects and initiatives that require longer term response. And so we're not necessarily going to see the fruits of our labor in the moment. So, but just even so, those projects, it is of immense importance that individuals in the community be involved in that. Simultaneously, because we won't necessarily see the long-term efforts, right? Our efforts be fruitful, right, in the immediate. We do need those immediate benefits. We need to see those immediate impacts in front of us, I think, to create that well that we draw from. So in addition to those local responses, these local responses, which I will talk about, being important as far as flood mitigation and response, they also create an opportunity for us to cultivate our own inner strength and resilience, right? To continue to be engaged until those long-term projects come to fruition. So with that, I will just jump in here to some local responses to flooding, some different opportunities that CRW is active in. And then again, we will have an opportunity as well for you all to share some ideas. I broke it down here into two categories that start with I. I was an English major, so I love alliteration. So the two that I came up with here are local responses on an institutional level and on an individual level. So what CRW is actively involved in on an institutional level is helping to cultivate what we call climate resilience hubs. And they are essentially just community institutions that can help residents prepare for and also respond to, as they're occurring, the extreme weather events that are going to be increasing, are happening, right? As Dira noted, with the shifts in the extremes of weather from one summer to the next, and then the increase in these extreme weather events over time. Climate resilience hubs, there are a couple examples here of a church and Boston Nature Center. And then on an individual level, there are many things that people can do on a local level as individuals coming together. One that CRW helps to support in some capacity is something called depaving. And there's an image here that basically says it all. Depaving is removing pavement, replacing it with green space, ta-da. But I will talk about it a little more deeply in a moment. So how can local institutions help us to respond to flooding? So again, the idea of climate resilience hubs, what and where are they? Just reiterating again that resilience hubs are these community institutions that help us prepare. The work that CRW has been in over the last 4 to 5 years in basically identifying climate resilience hubs at this moment has officially formally brought on 130 climate resilience hubs, which you can check out online at the link offered here. As you can see, as makes sense, because CRW is based here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that many of the hubs that we have identified and onboarded and continue to support are located in the Northeast and especially in the greater Boston area. So just some examples of who can be a hub. It's vast, and it's there are lots of different kinds of groups that can be hubs. Anything from a housing center to a house of worship to a nature center, as was noted on that past slide. And libraries are also incredible opportunities for resilience hubs. And what does it mean to become a resilience hub? The way that CRW has identified it is on basically, we call them like types or tiers. And with each tier, there are opportunities for different types of institutions or local organizations to become even more engaged in cultivating climate resilience. The kind of base level is as an engagement center. So that's just simply a hub can say, we promise to hold maybe a workshop, or we will distribute information about climate preparedness and offer resources to the community in that way. Another level is to become a relief station. So that's basically everything named as an engagement center. And then a hub also commits to basically being more like a daytime community support center whenever there's an extreme weather event. And that can look like a vast array of opportunities. So that could be an opportunity to serve the community as a place when it's too hot or it's too cold. It can be people who won't have power in an extreme weather event to have access to power. And then there's something that we also ask for commitment to, because obviously, while resilience hubs may offer opportunities, the city or the town that the hub is in is simultaneously doing that work. So you want to make sure that there's some even just baseline communication. And then the next tier is serving as an emergency shelter. So hubs can also do all that I've mentioned and also be more available, right? That can include different times of day and have a more robust supply, a robust amount of supplies for when there's an extreme weather event, and then have a more formalized coordination with emergency managers in their city or town. So why are hubs unique and essential? As you just saw on the last page, a hub can be a house of worship. It can be something that is more community or a private group. It also can be a municipal institution like a library. Why we really celebrate and are excited about hubs in response to extreme weather events like flooding is that they do offer a more creative, flexible, and immediate support and response, right? So unlike some institutions on a municipal level, which may require liabilities, and there's a lot more steps in order to put something into effect, right, for community response. A lot of times, some of these other groups are a little bit more nimble and can just respond in the moment, and that can be in a lot of creative ways, right? Having a library of things available in case there's some sort of storm or a flood. You can have a team of people, a club, right, within your institution of people who are get up and go and ready for when there's to serve people, right? If there was an emergency, you can have seed swaps, because we think a lot about food, right? In these moments of crisis, and empowering people to grow their own food. You can have music as a way for people to come together and to heal and to find joy in these moments. And also a garden is an opportunity as well. Hubs are also unique and essential because thinking especially about places like houses of worship and libraries, these are places that already support and are trusted by people that are in, as Dira named, environmental justice or climate vulnerable communities. So this is just a brief list here of often people who are in our community who are quite often most vulnerable and are most vulnerable to extreme weather events, and also vulnerable on other levels as well. So this is everybody from a vast array of communities. So BIPOC, lower income, people with disabilities, often non-English speaking creates a barrier to access to resources in a crisis. The ends of the spectrum in age, so everybody from the young to elders, and then often people who are isolated, so do not have social connections, or who might be unhoused, are also at greater risk when there's an extreme weather event. And again, it's these kinds of institutions that already have the local leaders that we mentioned and already have the trust of people to come to them when there is a crisis. So I just want to lift up quickly one particular hub that CRW has been working with that emerged in direct response to a flooding incident. So Wilmington, Delaware's Police Athletics League Community Center, led by Stacey Henry, basically when Hurricane Ida came through in 2021, Stacey jumped into action to respond to community needs. A lot of her work, as she, I think Samantha may put the link in the chat to a video interview of her where she speaks a lot about the hurdles and the challenges to getting resources to her community. And she just did not take no to an answer and was persistent and helped her community members not only receive, a stronger response and supports in response to Hurricane Ida because of her, but also she became a leader and is now, because of those efforts, being celebrated as USA Today's Women of the Year and being sought out to by groups like the Red Cross to help facilitate more flooding response efforts more broadly, which is amazing. And just thank you to Stacey Henry for her perseverance. So another, as I mentioned, on an individual level that we can respond to flooding. And we lift up depaving because this was a grassroots effort as well. This is an opportunity for people in the community to come together and respond to flooding in ways that also can be very joyful and celebratory. So depaving, what is it? Where did it begin? It began in Somerville. And I'm wearing multiple hats here. So I wear my crew hat as I'm speaking to you. I also am part of a local group called Green and Open Somerville. And in Somerville, for the past 13 years or so, depaving has been a local effort, again, to address flooding and stormwater issues, and in the process, bring community members together and basically strengthen our neighborhoods. So that began again in 2010 and was inspired in that moment by a group called depave.org, which is out in Portland, Oregon. And speaking to the justice issues that Dira had lifted up earlier, what is amazing about depave.org is they took the effort that we are doing, which is more like on an individual level and working with direct residents. And what they're doing now is depaving full parking lots and putting in playgrounds in underserved neighborhoods. And it's just a beautiful thing. So I highly recommend you go to depave.org and check them out when you have a moment. So why in Somerville? Why did we pursue this specifically there? You can see from this map, it sort of says it all, right? So Somerville is more than 3/4 paved. We have very little tree coverage. And as you can see, as you move from west to east Somerville, Massachusetts, the tree cover drops and the amount of paved surface increases dramatically. And as I know Dira mentioned kind of the upstream and the downstream communities. And as the upstream communities is where a lot of those larger priority projects are occurring. What is amazing is that in the downstream communities, depaving can be one way to not only mitigate flooding, but also to, as I mentioned, really activate the downstream communities themselves and to serve people directly who may not see the fruits of the efforts that are happening upstream. So as I mentioned, depaving has benefits on several levels. One is in regards to climate resilience, right, which is basically the Earth's and our community's ability to respond to and recover from climate impacts. So as I mentioned, depaving basically moves a paved surface, which has massive amounts of surface runoff into our streams, into our sewers. It changes that dramatically and makes it into a space where we have much more groundwater recharge and increased green space, which in addition to addressing flooding also has a cooling effect, which is immensely necessary in our urbanized and downstream communities. It also, the parts that I get really excited about is in regards to the community resilience, right? So as you can see from these images here with depaving, when we go into basically our volunteer groups go in and we pull up pavement in people's yards and driveways, This is a collective effort. So we have groups of people working together, which is amazing and has benefits that are immense, just in terms of creating deeper connections between people who don't know each other. And then we have opportunities for celebration as well. Like I mentioned before, sometimes we don't see those long-term efforts, right? So what depaving offers is an opportunity to rip up in 2 to 3 hours pavement and see something that you have been a part of and celebrate that. And then the last part of that is, like I alluded to already, it creates opportunities for connection and for us to show care for each other and our earth. During the pandemic, that was especially helpful, and just in moments where there are multiple crises happening in our communities. So this just shows you quickly just what does the depaving look like. So moving from left to right across the screen, we have our setup. So we have people can sign in. We have awesome posters to welcome people. We have bags of supplies. So anybody who wants to show up and depave, you just bring yourself, you bring your sweat, your energy, and your strength, and we will train you and we will put you right in there. And then as you can see here, the labor can be everything from hammering to prying to lifting asphalt to moving wheelbarrows back and forth to a dumpster. So there are lots of opportunities for people to get in there and get physical, and contribute. And then the last is just opportunity to relax. So once it's in the dumpster, there is a company that comes and takes that away and recycles it. And then we just sit around and eat pizza and hang out and talk to each other. So it also builds community in that way as well. So in the time of rest afterwards, there is an opportunity, right, for us to just talk to each other as people. And a lot of times I've witnessed at our depavings, for sure, people come who are like committed depaving participants. And then a lot of people didn't know each other before. So it creates those connections between neighbors who didn't even know they were living next to each other. So just naming real quick again, this is an opportunity visually. You can see this is the first depaving that was done in 2010 in Somerville. That was the backyard on the left, and it was a driveway that ran into the backyard, and it was paved. And then this is what, over 3 years, this person was able to cultivate on the right, which was, I think, 11 raised beds. So you can imagine, obviously, what impacts this has for flooding when you have this pavement removed, and then also what depaving can offer us as an opportunity to basically cultivate a green space that we didn't even necessarily know existed until the depaving occurred, right? And the ways it can serve the community and the earth afterwards. So just to name, I know I mentioned before that depaving, has been primarily smaller groups of individuals and volunteers and communities. We are also really excited because groups like Charles River Watershed Association, the Mystic River Watershed Association, the City of Everett, and the City of Cambridge have all on multiple levels shown excitement and interest in expanding depaving efforts, and seeing that actually as a watershed approach, as Dira was talking about. So it is an opportunity to, impact flooding watershed wide. And I think especially with places like the City of Cambridge, what they're exploring are ways to, and this gets at the justice component, is, as you can imagine, a depaving does cost money, even though you have volunteers. And what they're looking to is removing those financial barriers so that if someone wants their yard depaved or their driveway depaved, you're in, right? If you're going to be contributing to the flooding mitigation and you're helping your community, we want to make that as available to you as possible. So just want to give a shout out again to those groups and say thank you for the continued effort in cultivating depaving. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Dira, and we're going to give us an opportunity here to have a brief Q&A. So here, Dira, I'll pass it off to you. I'll leave this slide up for a second, and then I am going to take off share screen so that we can see each other.
Yeah, thanks, Leigh. So
Welcome.
before we go into our breakout activity that we'd like to do with you guys, we're opening up some space for a Q&A. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you to unmute, or you could type your question in the chat. And I also wanted to share, I think I forgot during my section to share a survey that CRWA is doing to gather from watershed residents to understand how climate change impacts you and your family. So I'm just going to put it in the chat for folks. All right, so I see a question from Peter. Question is, what has been your experience in engaging individual private businesses in developing their own climate resilience? That's a really great question. I can answer from CRWA's perspective, and Leigh, I think you have probably insights, especially around the Resilience Hub working with private businesses. So CRWA, we do primarily work with municipalities in terms of our watershed flood model that is working directly with municipal, town, and staff. But a lot of our engagement work, like Leigh and I have tried to engage with some other private businesses around at least sharing the flood model and seeing if folks, are interested in doing surveys and things like that. The thing about private businesses in our watershed, at least, and our mission is that a lot of the climate resiliency commitments are tied to local regulations. So that's why, as an organization, we focus a lot on the local regulations and how we could help influence or promote stronger regulations, whether that be stronger wetlands regulation, stronger tree protection, strong or requiring more stormwater management. And every town and city is different. And so part of the work that we're doing with at a regional scale is also looking at which town and cities have the best examples and how the towns and cities have worked with developers and private owners to ensuring that they are also able to achieve the goals that the town and cities have set. And then Leigh, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
Yeah, I don't, Peter, it's a really good question. And I honestly don't have probably as much to be able to share in regards to private businesses, right? So a lot of, I think, CRW's work around climate resilience has often been more so with organizations that are seeking us out because they already have an interest. Right. And even when we're out in community in partnership with CRWA, most people that we end up talking to end up being individuals who are part of some sort of community group or an organization. One thing I can mention, though, I think as around individual private businesses in connection with depaving is that one thing that we've been talking with, so it's both CRWA and then the Mystic River Watershed Association, we're actually applying for a grant with them right now to hopefully do a handful of, if we get the grant, to do a handful of depavings in East Somerville, each of which will be like a different kind of depaving so that we can see through all of the hurdles and challenges. And what we would want to find is a private business who would be willing to do a depaving project so we can track all of that, have things we can report out on, and then we can go through and recruit more private businesses with authentic responses to what they might name as risks or cost concerns and that sort of thing. So fingers crossed, we will be able to do that and then report that back to others in the community as well.
Great. Well, thank you both. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but full disclosure, up here in Burlington, Vermont, I'm sure you know about the catastrophic flooding that Vermont faced this past summer. My firm, my business partner and I, that's my firm, we've been hired to develop and implement, facilitate, run a new climate resilience roadmap program for businesses in Vermont, and are just starting the process of getting that going, and are going to have the first workshop of an 8-workshop 5-month program in mid-November. So frankly, looking for any any insights, intel, because with individual businesses developing their own resilience roadmaps, there's a lot of, basically they don't know what they don't know kind of thing. All they know is, this is a serious issue that we need to kind of figure out.
Mm.
Okay, thank you.
No, it's hard, but thank you for your question. I see one more in the chat. Maybe Leigh, we can answer that and then dive into our breakout activity. All right, so Sarah in the chat put, clearly the focus in depaving is on changing a paved area to a green space, but I wonder if there is or will be also changing solid asphalt to the kind of pavers that have spaces for drainage or even plants to grow, like for a driveway where you might need a surface that can support a car. That's a really great question. And as someone who is very passionate about green stormwater management and pervious pavers or pervious pavements, that is definitely a solution. I think that more homeowners are looking into, especially for their driveway. So for the folks that don't know, instead of, maybe having fully solid, everything is impervious, you could break up your impervious surfaces to allow for some pathway of water to still get in between your impervious surfaces so that there is still some infiltration or filtration of your stormwater runoff. I will say at a larger scale, pervious pavement can be very expensive for like municipalities to look at a larger scale. And then to your point, there are also certain limitations that might be limitations around groundwater level, or even what kind of vehicles might need to go on top of your pervious pavement. So I think for like fire lanes at certain property, I know at least in some projects I've seen, they will not do like pervious pavement for that surface. So there are some limitations around there. Leigh?
Yeah, I can speak to maybe a couple parts of that. So to Sarah, 3 things are coming up. One, I'll say, I hear what you're saying about permeable pavers. I think it's a nuanced situation. So I think for people, we'd want to also ask, like, how often are people using their driveways and thinking about issues of erosion? So, and I say that because I can give an example of one of our actually organizers, Renee, I'll name her, give her a shout out. What they did is they said, well, we don't need our driveway as much because we don't park on it as much. And so what they did is turn it mostly into green and then put more like the embedded rock in to hold the weight of tires from a car that's in there maybe once every couple of weeks, so there is that option too. It doesn't necessarily have to be like only green or permeable pavers. There are other creative solutions as well, depending on how often people use their driveway or even parts of their driveway. So you might say it could just be, if you have like, a long driveway and you only need that last spot, that could stay paved, but maybe you could just do, crushed stone or like in these embedded blocks for the last few spots. So just want to name that. And then the other thing, I'll just name one other thing here is, with green and open, we haven't done as much with like working with people with permeable pavers, because green and open specifically is about committing to green space, because the work we do is also about biodiversity justice and the concerns around loss of pollinators. So, and that's kind of what we've been committed to in green and open. That does not necessarily have to mean that depaving as it expands can't include some of these projects. And I have wondered, and I don't necessarily know the answer to this, but maybe somebody else does, or it's something that we can all push for. I think a lot about how like Mass Save, right, has rebates and all this for lots of things around renewable energy, but not necessarily anything set up for like if you wanted to do pavers, like what do we have as far as things to offset those costs or support people in that transition? And I personally don't know the answer to that, but that might be, I think, to Dira's point about the costs, even on a smaller scale, might incentivize and support people who might want to make that change. And I just want to encourage people as well. I know we're going to shift here to give people at least 10 minutes or so to talk with each other. But you may have seen on the Q&A slide, you stick around, we can have an opportunity as well if people want to stay on afterwards to keep talking. I have nowhere to go. I want to be here, so let's do it.
Great. I don't see any other questions in the chat, so maybe we can move on to our activity. Leigh, would you be able to screen share so I can describe the activity? So we'll have like 10-ish minutes for, I'm thinking probably just 2 breakout groups, one that Leigh will help facilitate and one that it will help facilitate. And our activity is really just to get to know you a little better. And part of this activity is to just share your name, what town or city you're in, and 2 things to share with the group. Are there any local flood mitigation projects in your area or in your neighborhood, whether that be a municipality or city town led or community led? Could be any kind of nature-based solution or strategy or other that you're aware of. If you're not, that's okay. The other kind of question we want to touch on is, in your experiences or however many community meetings you've been engaged with, how can projects like this that address different climate resiliency needs be more accessible to you or your community members? So is that translations? Is it being in person? Or is it, like providing childcare during the event? Are there examples that you've seen that work best to share? And then just quickly, activity norms when we're doing the activity, just be respectful as people share out their experiences and also share the space. So take the time that you have to speak and also allow other folks to speak as well. And I guess with that, we're able to break out into breakout rooms, Sam.
And we're back. So I know we're a small crew. So I wonder, I don't, in terms of reporting out, what makes the most sense? Maybe it's just we give a couple minutes here for people to share some key points that came up that you're like, man, I'm really good. That's going to be sitting with me after this event, or this is something that I found interesting and I want to maybe make moves on next. So maybe there's just some key things that people might want to share. I don't know. What came up for people in their groups?
No. Yeah, I'll just share that my group was very small. It was just Sarah and I. And so we had a nice discussion about Sarah lives in a completely different watershed. And so just thinking about, what's that watershed doing in terms of flood mitigation? How can we connect and thinking about, and we did talk a little bit about just flooding at the local level for where Sarah lives. But yeah, I think just thinking about like where are the opportunities that maybe residents can learn more about what their town is doing, especially if a river runs through your town, which I think is a really important conversation to have with your residents that are at risk for, flooding from the river.
Yeah, one of the things that occurred to me was that after we had these big floods this summer, if I had been curious what the select board's response might be if it had come up at any of their meetings, which I'm sure it must have because we have so many farms that got flooded. All those meetings are on Zoom as well as in person. And I don't know if that's true for a lot of towns, but it certainly is here. And I know during COVID, everything went on to Zoom. And I'm sure a lot of towns have continued either using that or doing it hybrid because it's super handy. It can be frustrating, but it's also really handy. And sometimes those meetings are recorded. So you could check back if you need to.
Yeah. I think maybe if I can maybe respond to that, I think it's a really good point too, is thinking about like, I think a lot about what served us. We have our coping mechanisms that we create regarding the current moment. And so COVID, it was like we needed to do a particular thing, and now we're in a new moment. But COVID was like just long enough that we developed all these new habits and ways of being and connecting or disconnecting, that it's really difficult to shift to like remember or recall in some ways the power and the importance of like gathering in person, or like we have these new tools that can expand the ways in which people can connect and be parts of decision-making spaces, and public dialogues and dialogues with the decision makers. And at the same time, people just find like a very comfortable space and don't necessarily want to stretch as much in this new moment. And now we're in a different moment because now we are coming into cold weather. So it's like a different time than, and COVID reemerging. So it's different than even what the summer maybe offered to us.
Yeah. We have those tools because they can be better. They're better than nothing. Like we're all saying at the beginning of the pandemic when we started using Zoom, was like, wow, this really sucks, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot better. I mean, I could never have attended this meeting if it was in Cambridge. But on Zoom, click, I'm there.
Yeah. Maybe before we have a wrap, I don't know if, I mean, Delphine, I'm naming you only because you had raised the initial concern, and it again speaks to like an expansive part of the prompt that was offered. I wonder if you would want to share some of the things that you had raised.
Briefly, I mentioned some concern that I've heard from folks in my neighborhood related to the heavy rains that we've had. Some basements have flooded, some backyards have flooded, but independently of that, there's also been an increase in mosquitoes, especially this year, but even in the last few years. And there's concern that even if one takes all the measures one can for source reduction, really looking for any standing water, and that includes protecting rain barrels well and cleaning them out well. These are important points of detail that often aren't mentioned when rain barrels are suggested as good things to implement. So mosquitoes can be pretty intense, and that's the case around my house. And my neighbors are really pushing to hire a company to come spray. Based on what I've been researching, even the so-called natural sprays with essential oils can damage the ecosystem, can hurt pollinators. And mosquitoes, another detail that I learned this year, apparently are capable of reproducing even without standing water if there's enough moisture just on surfaces, on open soil, on mulch. So we think of the things that some of us might recommend related to flood mitigation. Get a rain barrel, plant a garden, use mulch for soil health. These can indirectly cause a rise in mosquito activity. And another concern that I hear also is, oh, I wouldn't want to depave my driveway. This would make my foundation more exposed to water infiltration. And Leigh, I don't know if you have a standard answer for this concern. I imagine it must come up pretty often.
Yeah, I personally don't, but I do know like others on our team, I'll name Cater specifically, one of the organizers who works in the technical sides of like construction and is able to speak with people a little bit more. And that's also why we do site visits. So I didn't name that as part of when I talked about depaving because I only had a certain amount of time, but part of what we do are also site visits so that we can go and see, where if the pavement was removed, like where's and asking people like, where do you notice rain flow and when it falls, so just getting a sense of that, where we can suggest people putting in rain gardens to draw the water away. So we talk a little bit about that with people as well when we do site visits, because that definitely comes up over and over again.
Thank you for bringing up rain gardens. That was,
of course.
That ties into ensuring drainage as part of one's gardening planning. And that was an important point that was brought up in our breakout.
Of course. Yeah, and thank you as well. I know we're here at time. Just want to name though too the way in which you saying, Delphine, naming that when you say mosquitoes, and that is a narrative that potentially we have to be aware of, and it is a very valid community concern that doesn't get pitted against these efforts to mitigate flooding, but gets woven into the response effort. So it's just a good thing to keep in mind as well. So I know we're here, we're complete, I think. So here I am just gonna, just for formality's sake, just share this last slide with you all. Here we are. Sorry, it's taking a moment. Come on, slide. So thank you to everybody who is here with us, the mighty few here at the end, and just want to say thank you again for your presence, for your listening, your curiosity, the questions, the sharing, just offering you all here opportunities to stay in touch. There's Dira's info, my direct email. You can go to CRWA's website and you can learn a little more about their newsletter and sign up to get more involved with the flood model work. So any events related to that are always posted in their newsletter and shared that way. And then Dira, I don't know if you want to just mention real quick about the survey before we.
Yeah, I put it in the chat earlier. I think it's still in there, but we have our survey on our website. And ideally it's to learn from residents about their lived experiences of climate change, what your thoughts are about flooding and flooding mitigation projects. And so it's all, the survey questions are there. We'd love to hear from you. Please fill out the survey, share it with your friends, your family members who might want to also share their experiences with flooding. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me directly at that email, which will also be included in a follow-up email post this event. But I just included the link, direct link to the survey in the chat.
Yes, and I apologize because I think I might have cut off when I copied it in. It's www.crwa.org/ it's supposed to be CRFM-23, right? Just naming that, not CRFM-2. Yeah. So just note that I'm verbally stating it here. That is a mistake. CRFM-23 for the year. Okay, so we will potentially leave you with this. I'm going to do this for a second here. Show us this beautiful image again so that we can breathe it in, immerse ourselves in it. And I know that, we had also mentioned that we are happy to stay on if anyone wants to continue dialogue. Maybe Sam, at this moment, if you want to stop recording, and then